No, we're early. I think the bell went off, but there we go. And there's the bell. Okay, we are at the halfway point of this quarter, theoretically. So what I thought I'd do for just a minute or two here, just to kind of get us kind of on the same page as we move forward here, is just review what we've been dealing with as we've talked about this idea for the quarter of go fish because of what's on the line. We talked the first lesson about the fact that we looked at that calling of the first 4 apostles where Jesus told them, come follow me and I'll do what? I'll make you become fishers of men. And as we looked through several Old Testament passages, that is something God does. God says, I'm going to make you into something you currently aren't to serve my purposes if you will just allow me. And we talked about the fact that God will take us wherever we are, whoever we are, good, bad, indifferent, spiritual, not spiritual, depending on what our focus is. As long as we then turn our focus, turn ourselves over to God, God will use us wherever we are to impact somebody's life. We just have to be aware of that. And then we looked at the second lesson about this idea that we were all fish once. That all of us at some point in our lives had someone tell us the story of the gospel. It might have been parents. It might have been whoever it was. But somebody had to teach us. Somebody had to tell us that we needed to know God. Somebody had to introduce us to who Jesus is. And that we need to be thankful that somebody took a risk. Somebody stepped out of their comfort zone or told us maybe something we weren't comfortable hearing to say, you need to know more about this. And like I said, it may have been your parents when you were young that you became a Christian young, but maybe it was somebody who later in your life, if you struggled, somebody brought you back into the right relationship with God. There's somebody who has fished for you, and we need to be aware of that. Then we asked the question, why fish? Why do we go about doing this? And we looked for the next 2 lessons at Acts chapter 4. Right? I guess this lesson, then we skipped one, then Acts chapter 4 again. At that scene where Peter and John end up in prison because they healed the guy, and they're told, don't talk about Jesus anymore, and they flat out say this great statement, we just can't help it. We have to talk about the things that we've seen. We have to talk about what we've experienced with Jesus. And that this whole, really, in my opinion, that was kind of the premise, the foundation lesson for this whole quarter, that this message about God's plan of salvation has to be taught. It isn't something you're just going to figure out on your own. I mean, yes, you could figure it out on your own if you had a Bible, but even then, it's the Bible teaching you. But we have to share that message because somebody's not going to sit out in the woods under a tree and just innately figure out, oh, I need to be immersed for the forgiveness of my sins. They have to be taught that, and that's where we come in. We can't help but speak about the things that we've seen and heard Jesus do in our lives. And then when Larry filled in, he taught the lesson looking at the resurrection of Lazarus and those 3 traits that he talked about, the need that we have as fishermen to be authentic, to be compassionate, and to be sacrificial. That matters so much as we're dealing with the people around us. We have to be authentic. We have to be real to those who are seeking. And then last week we talked about fish guts. We did. Having guts to fish would be the better way to say it, but it's funner to say fish guts. But we talked about the fact that we get afraid. Sometimes we worry about it. Sometimes it freaks us out to have to share our faith. But we looked then at the conclusion of Acts chapter 4 and looked at that incredible prayer that those first century Christians pray when Peter and John come back there, and they begin that prayer in Acts chapter 4, verse 23 with, "O sovereign God," or "sovereign Lord." And it's that the whole prayer is an acknowledgement that God, you're in control, you're in charge, and just let us do your will. And we closed out last week with the challenge or the encouragement, or however you want to think of it, to say this to yourself, and better yet, pray this to God during the week, over the week. I hope some of you did. Sovereign Lord, enable me to speak your word with what? Boldness. Simple statement. I mean, if I can memorize that without looking at my notes, any of you can. God, sovereign God, enable me, give me the strength, give me the courage, give me the power to speak your word with boldness. And that really is the essence of what this is all about. You know, we talked from the beginning of this quarter that this isn't going to be, we're not going to talk about methods a whole lot. We are going to spend 1 week talking about a couple of different methods, but this is mainly about the whole premise behind why we should share our faith. And why we need to get past thinking it's somebody else's job. It's the preacher's job, it's the elder's job, it's whoever's job. It's all of our jobs, because we were all fish once. And Jesus says, come follow me, and I'm going to turn you into something that you're not right now, something you've never been before, but I'm going to help you be just exactly that. So, let's move into our lesson for tonight, but first let's have a prayer, shall we? God our Father, we thank you so much for tonight. Thank you for allowing us to be here together, to assemble together, to encourage one another, to just share in each other's fellowship. God, you've blessed us in so many ways. You're such an incredible, giving, merciful God. You have blessed us beyond what we can imagine. We just thank you so much for allowing us to be in a relationship with you. God, as we study this topic this quarter, I pray that you will help us to be bold, to be willing to step out in different ways, in all the different ways that come into our lives. Help us just to be aware of the opportunities that we have to share your message with the people around us. Pray that you'll bless each class this evening, each teacher, each student, that everything that we do will be according to your will be glorifying to you and edifying to us. We pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, so tonight we're going to talk about a couple of ideas that I say they're very, very closely related. They're not even, they're the same thing, but I have to say something like that. How many of you ever been to this place? Pike Place Fish Market in Seattle? Whoa. I got that picture yesterday. Maybe you're in there. That's a fish she bought right there. This one? Gross. So if you're not aware, I mean, as you can see right here, this is the place where they throw the fish back and forth, and it's kind of chaotic. And what are they doing there? I was going to say it's not really that hard. Selling fish. It's called a fish market. What does that mean? That these guys, and whoever threw it over here, those guys buy their fish from somewhere, and they bring it to present it to the public for them to buy, right? This is not an economics class. This has a point. When we think about this idea of fishing, of sharing our faith, we don't want to think in terms of marketing. So let me get that out of the way right now. But we do need to think in terms of investing. Investing in the people that we're trying to contact, investing in the people that we're trying to impact. And really, if you look at the idea in the class that Larry taught, those 3 traits about being authentic, compassionate, and sacrificial, in some ways, now hear me when I say it, in some ways that is how we market ourselves. We have to be real. We have to present ourselves to the people around us as authentic and genuine. And we have to be that. We can't fake it, and we have to really be that. So what we want to talk about tonight is this idea of, in carrying on that whole fish market idea for some reason, the idea of investing. How do we invest in these people that we come in contact with every day? How do we invest in those people's lives? And then secondly, we're going to look at, is it worth it? Anytime you talk about investment, if you think investment and think of a word that you'll probably find with it that has a negative connotation, what word would you think of? Risk, that's the word. We have to understand that there's going to be some risk when we invest into people's lives. Look over to Luke chapter 19. As you're turning over there, let me ask you a question. Think about the person or some person in your life, maybe as a younger person, maybe it was yesterday, whatever. Somebody that really, really encouraged you. Somebody that really helped you make a tough decision or helped you grow or helped you step out in an area that you weren't sure about doing it. Think about who that person might be for you. Okay, you're there. Do you know that person well? If somebody really helped you grow, really encouraged you, don't you almost kind of have to know them pretty well? I mean, a stranger walks up to you in the street and says, "Hey, I think you'll make a great doctor someday, son." You're going to go, "You're a crazy person." You know, you don't know that person. There's no relationship there. But when you think about the person or persons maybe in your life who have really, really motivated you, really impacted you, the commonality for probably each of us would be a relationship. That there's something that person gave to us or brought to us or brought to the situation that gave them some validation that we could take. You know, for me, when I was in my late teens, maybe early 20s, my dad reminded me in a letter that I think I still have somewhere, that remember when you always used to say you were going to be a youth minister? And at that point I was so far from being a youth minister, but I was like, Now had somebody, even somebody at church came up and told me, "Remember you?" I just went, whatever. But my dad could say that, and it made me go, wow, I did. I used to always say that. I used to always say I was going to go into ministry. And now at whatever it was, 20 years old, I was not in ministry. Let's just put it that way. But because my dad said it, it carried a whole lot of weight. Because my dad had invested in me. My dad had spent, literally my whole life investing in me. In order for us to impact those people, and I've asked you periodically throughout this quarter to think of the one person that you can impact differently than I can. The one person that you know, that maybe all of us know, but you have a better relationship with them than most people. In order for us to impact those people, we have to cultivate those relationships. And it goes back again to the class that Larry taught. We have to cultivate those three traits of being authentic, being compassionate, and being sacrificial. When Larry taught that, he looked at the resurrection of Lazarus. And in that lesson, we saw those three traits from Jesus. And when we try and make that comparison to ourselves, it's kind of easy to lose that a little bit because you're thinking, well, that's Jesus. He's raising this guy from the dead. I'm not going to do that for anybody. That's just not going to happen. But in this scene that we're going to look at here in Luke 19, Jesus doesn't do anything miraculous. But he, again, exhibits those same three traits. And I believe, what we'll see is Jesus teaching this idea of investing in somebody. This is a familiar account. Look at Luke chapter 19. We'll just read the whole, there they are, the whole thing, 1 through 10. Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through, and behold, there was a man named Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector and was rich. And he was seeking to see who Jesus was, but on account of the crowd, he could not, because he was small in stature. So he ran on ahead and climbed up into a sycamore tree to see him, for he was about to pass that way. And when Jesus came to the place, he looked up and said to him, Zacchaeus, hurry and come down, for I must stay at your house today. So he hurried and came down and received him joyfully. And when he saw it, they all grumbled, all the people, the crowd there. They all grumbled, he has gone in to be the guest of a man who is a sinner. And Zacchaeus stood and said to the Lord, Behold, Lord, the half of my goods I give to the poor, and if I have defrauded anyone of anything, I restore it fourfold. And Jesus said to him, Today's salvation has come to this house, since he also is a son of Abraham. And this great verse, this great statement, for the Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost. So we're all probably relatively familiar with this account. And the first question is, why in the world would Jesus go out of his way to go into the home of this guy? Why would Jesus go, why would he want to spend any time with this guy? Do you think Jesus knew Zacchaeus was a tax collector when he said, hey, I want to spend the day at your house? I would imagine. I mean, John tells at the beginning of his gospel that Jesus knows the hearts of men. I think he knew what this guy's deal was. George? Yeah. Well, George said a lot of these people knew him. So when Zacchaeus changes, it's going to make an impact. It's interesting, though, the text says that he is a chief tax collector. Now, you've probably heard this over and over, but I just kind of want to look at this just a little bit more, just to kind of clarify this situation. Chief tax collectors are guys who are under contract through the Roman government to collect the taxes in the area. And Rome says from Wes and Maria Miller, I need you to collect $10 this month. So me as the tax collector, I go, all right, I'll do it. Yep, it's $12. That's what they say you owe. And I pocket $2. And I mean, and it was known. I mean, it was almost to the point that it was corruption that was just accepted. Because people were like, well, that's how the guy makes his living, I guess, whatever. But what's interesting, too, is that system makes it incredibly tempting for the tax collectors to get more and more corrupt, because it could be $10 and he could show up and go, yeah, it's $20 this month. What are they going to say? No, I'm not paying that. Well, yeah, you are, because you'll get killed otherwise. You'll get thrown into jail. Well, what then the chief tax collectors also had were guys called publicans. And I always thought they were the same thing until just recently. Publicans are like assistants to this regional tax collector guy. So he will send out, like tax collector John will send out his publicans. He'll tell them, I need you to get $10 from 5 different families. Then they might go and get 15. They bring back 10. What they don't know is that really all you needed to get was 7. So I pocket all the extra money here. So it's kind of like the original pyramid scheme, if you will. Who's the most, when you think of publicans, who comes to mind? Matthew. Matthew was one of those guys. He was the assistant tax collector guy. So they're just reviled. Nobody likes them. The Jews hate them. The Jews won't let Jewish publicans or tax collectors use their money in the temple. It's considered tainted. They, if the tax collector comes and says that you owe 15 denarii and all you have is a 20, you don't take their change. You'll go borrow from your friend to have the exact change because you don't want their change back. And I just say that to say, this is how bad this guy is. He's a chief. He's one of the big dogs when it comes to these corrupt tax collectors. And Jesus, which this again is one of those scenes that it's almost funny. This guy climbs up in a tree, and Jesus stops. I don't know, for some reason, to me it's like if I'm Zacchaeus and I'm up in a tree and the guy I'm coming to see stops and goes, Zacchaeus, first thing I'm going to do goes, oh, I'm busted up in the tree. I look like an idiot. I'm up in the tree. But he says, Zacchaeus, come down. I need to spend the day. I need to go have dinner at your house. Why would Jesus do this? Why would Jesus choose this guy? When you think of this idea of investing, you think of this idea of those three characteristics. What do you see? What do you see in Jesus that shows him investing in Zacchaeus? Was there any risk for Jesus? I mean, not danger necessarily, but I mean, what does the crowd say? He's going to eat with a sinner. So Jesus' reputation at least is at risk. Couldn't he have said, hey, Zacchaeus, come down, we need to talk, let's go sit over here on a bench? Then people would have went, wow, he's talking to this. But even more, he says, let's go to your house. He doesn't say, let's go to my house. He says, I'm going to go be a guest in your home. Maybe we don't get the cultural ramifications of that, but it's there. I mean, it's a big deal. Dana. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. If you didn't hear what Dana said, he said, you think of this in those terms of marketing, this is like the worst thing Jesus could do. Here I want to get a crowd. I wanted some people to accept me as a decent teacher. I'm going to go hang out with the tax collector guy. I mean, that is the exact opposite of what you would expect him to do. But Jesus sees an opportunity to be compassionate, to show compassion to a guy that obviously the town didn't like. I mean, there was no love lost for this guy. And Jesus says, I'm willing to sacrifice my reputation. I'm willing to sacrifice the grumbling and the mumbling and complaining of the crowd, which we see happens. But Jesus says, I'm willing to put that behind me and focus on this guy because this guy matters. So here's the next idea. They're just in a nutshell. That's Jesus showing us those same three traits, but he's showing us that he's willing to invest the time into Zacchaeus to change this guy because, as George mentioned, when he changes, it's going to impact the people around him. John. But he's little bitty. Yeah, what John says, what the passage there in 19:10 says. Jesus said that he came not to have the lost come to him. He didn't say, I'm going to go put up a big sign and I'm waiting for all the lost to show up at my building. Sound familiar? He says, I'm going to go seek. And if I have to climb up in a tree, if I have to pull the guy out of the tree, I'm going to go seek the lost, not wait for the lost to walk in the door. He says, I'm going to go seek the lost. And he does. He seeks out Zacchaeus, who, maybe in the crowd's mind is the worst of the worst. So, the question we have to ask when it comes to us, is it worth the risk? What we see with Jesus is that he is clearly focused on Zacchaeus as a soul, not as a tax collector. And you notice even in the text, there's verse 5, Zacchaeus, come down, I'm going to go stay at your house. He hurries, he's excited. When they all see it, the people get mad. Verse 8, Zacchaeus stood and said to the Lord, behold, Lord, I'm going to give everything back. If I've frauded anybody, I'm going to give him back 4 times. What's missing there? What does Jesus say to him that makes him say that? Nothing. Zacchaeus gets all excited because Jesus sought him out. And Jesus, maybe there was dialogue. Maybe there was an exchange that we don't know about. But what we see is Zacchaeus goes, this guy's interested in me. And something clicked in Zacchaeus because Jesus was willing to say, I want to spend some time with you. I know who you are. Everybody in town knows who you are. But I'm going to spend some time with you. And like I said, something clicks with Zacchaeus. Jesus wasn't worried about what it was going to cost him. It was going to cost him some time. He's passing through town. We don't know, what the plan was, but Jesus did. That was his plan, to go spend time with Zacchaeus. Not concerned about reputation. He's not concerned about, what they're going to say. He's just, I've got to do this because this guy matters. So for us, as we think of this idea, and I hope for this quarter, I hope this is kind of on your mind during this quarter, as we think about how we can be fishers of men, we can go door to door in the neighborhoods around here and knock on the door and hand them a tract and say, hey, we love you, want you to come to church, see you. And you never know. I mean, it's happened before that somebody goes, I've been looking for this. But for the most part, what it's going to take is us investing. It's going to take us saying, hey, person at work that I see every day, that we sit at the same lunch table, person I'm in class with all day, every day, I want to get to know you because you matter to me, because you're a soul that God cares about. So, when we think of that idea, I mean, it's one of those things that even as I say that, I have it written here in my notes to say that, my stomach can kind of go, that whole point where you walk up to that person, even if it's somebody you know, somebody you see every day. Hey, I know I go to church all the time, but I just want to tell you, I'm concerned about your soul. And the internal furnace goes, because you're like, wow, okay, uncomfortable. But is it worth it? Is it worth this? Is it worth it for us to invest that time, that effort, that energy, that risk? Well, what I want us to look at for the rest of our time together is some benefits. Because, that's kind of where we are. We live in a what's in it for me culture. And when we think about sharing our faith, I think we need to be aware that sharing our faith is great for that person. I mean, it's what that person needs to hear. It was great for Zacchaeus that Jesus stopped and did this. But for us, there are some benefits for us when it comes to sharing our faith. Look back at verse 7 there in Luke 19. What does the crowd say? The crowd grumbles because of what? Yeah, he's gone to be off doing something with a sinner. Now, think about this in that context. Not for Jesus. Think of yourself in that situation. A lot of times when we think about our Christian life, and maybe we don't, maybe some people do. Let's say that. Some people think about their Christian life as a series of don'ts. You don't do this, you don't do that. It's like I heard a sermon a week or so ago about we need to be for stuff and not just against stuff. I don't remember who said that. That was brilliant. All right, it was mediocre, but whatever. But when it comes to our Christian, the perception of Christianity, sometimes it is we just don't do stuff. We avoid doing wrong. Well, when we think about sharing our faith, we need to think about what an adventure it can be. And, I've talked about this some here during this quarter. Think about how this idea of sharing your faith can be an adventure. Jesus calls to Zacchaeus, tells him, come down out of the tree. I need to go spend some time with you. And the crowd begins to grumble and complain that he's going to go be the guest of a sinner. Now, in that context, what the people are saying is that's crazy for Jesus to be doing that. That's an edgy thing for Jesus to be doing. That's something unacceptable. There are, for you guys in high school, middle school, there are people that other people won't talk to. I mean, we all know that. My school, there are those people who are the standalones. You go talk to that person, that's risky because everybody else is going to see you talk to that person. Even in our jobs, wherever you work, there's people at work that that's the guy that we don't ever really talk to. He works down in the basement. We don't know what he does. You go talk to that person and watch what the other people do. Why are you talking to that guy? Yeah. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, it's what April says is kind of the idea of a spiritual paramedic. The paramedics don't drive around going, "Oh, there's another healthy one. Great." They're looking for the guy with the leg that's bent weird ways. They're They're there to fix stuff. But that's what I'm saying. When we think about sharing our faith with Jesus, walking down that street, little guy up in the sycamore tree, much easier to keep walking. Much easier to just go, little man up in the tree, keep going. But no, he stops and says, you. And again, I have to believe that Jesus knows what the reaction of the crowd is going to be. When we reach out to the person at school, at work, that nobody else will reach out to, don't we know what the reaction of the crowd's going to be? You want an endorphin rush? Be the guy that reaches out to the person nobody will talk to. How many times did Jesus do that? Give me an example. Jesus touches the untouchable. The woman at the well. What? The lepers. Caught in adultery. All over. It's all over the Gospels. Jesus, that's what he does. And so many times we even see the crowd go, oh, why is he doing that? That's what we can do. We can be that person in that situation. Why is she talking to that guy at school? Nobody talks to him. He's a weirdo. Because he's a soul. Jeremy. Mm-hmm. Yeah. 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 What Jeremy's saying is that Jesus could have called, any guy out of the crowd. I mean, yes, there's a little man sitting up in the tree. He could have went, hey, you. And Zacchaeus would have went, oh, man. But I didn't make the Bible. But instead, Jesus pays attention enough to see the one seeking. And that's a great point, because that's a great sub-principle there. That we need to be aware, even if it's just a small thing. The person at work who just happens to mention, I saw you praying at lunch. I think that's weird. At least they said something. They said, so they used the word prayer. There's an opening. But that's a good point, that Jesus sees the guy who's actually making a step toward him. Maybe ours won't be as blatant or visible as somebody up in a tree. But we need to be aware of those instances where God just cracks the door open a little bit for us. You think about those first century Christians. And really, well, I mean, you think the apostles or the first century Christians who were around the first apostles. And I never really thought about this until I was working on this lesson. Could you imagine what it would have been like to be one of those first century Christians, and every day you're around Peter or John or any of the other apostles? You never know when you might happen to be present at a healing. Or you might be present when you get arrested. I mean, that's adventure right there. I mean, it's every day that they met together. We looked at Acts chapter 4. They say that great prayer, and the place shakes, and they're filled with the Holy Spirit. The next day, they went out and did exactly what they weren't supposed to do. And they didn't know if they were going to be arrested or not. But they did it because sharing our faith brings with it an incredible sense of the unknown. Sometimes maybe a better word would be a sense of the unexpected. We don't know what's going to happen. But we need to be willing to take that risk to invest in sharing our faith, because you just never know what's going to happen. I know I've shared this a lot, but it's kind of on my mind lately. We've been more and more involved in World Bible School. Just a few weeks into it for me, it's amazing to me the people that register or whatever for not our thing exclusively, but all over on World Bible School. You look at these people all over the world. You have a student from somewhere. Didn't you have an international student? Just somebody here? I have a student from, I can't even remember where it is, but when you see them do their lessons, it's like, wow, this person's doing their study thing. And it's like, whether it's somebody in our area or somewhere else in the United States or someplace else in the world, it's like, because it's a small thing with the World Bible School thing, because I was willing to sign up to do this, I get to be involved with somebody in Nairobi or wherever it is doing this Bible study. And that's cool. But it's the same thing that we can do in our workplaces, in our schools, and wherever we go, where if we're willing to take that risk, take that step, that could be the greatest adventure of all. Just to see what people will say. See how somebody reacts to your story. We don't want to be, we don't want to reduce Christianity to attendance. We don't want to reduce Christianity to showing up in a building and checking a box. I was here, I'm done. Think about, that is not what we were called to be. Jesus, when we think about, and I don't mean to be flippant about it, but we think about what Jesus says about the Great Commission, going to all the world and preach the gospel. That's very different than go into your building 3 times a week and sit there. Right? Seriously. It really... So we need to think bigger, I guess is what I'm saying. When we think about this call to become fishers of men, to let Jesus make us fishers of men, it's a great big calling. And it shouldn't be boring. I'll never forget this. My nephew, when he was here 2 years ago, Jeremy, for our lectureship, I don't remember if it was in here or if it was in this teen class, but I remember him saying that he hears his teenagers a lot of times talk about how being a Christian can be boring. It's go to church and it's this, and it's just kind of boring. And he said, I always tell him, if you think living the Christian life is boring, you're boring because you're not doing it right. And that's so true. Think of it as this adventure that it can be. You think of 2 Corinthians 5:14, where Paul is talking about why he does this. And he says, the love of Christ does what? Controls us. Other translations say compel us. It motivates us. It drives us. When we think about what's been done for us, and really what we're asked to do is just go tell somebody that's pales in comparison to what Jesus did for us, right? So the love of Christ compels us. Okay, so adventure is one of the fringe benefits of being a fisher of men. Another one is it gives us purpose. It gives everything in our life purpose. What did Jesus do that was so spectacular with Zacchaeus? You guys not know your Bibles very well? He did something amazing. He went and had dinner with him. But there was a purpose there, right? He goes to his house, they sit and have dinner and they talk. Ooh. That's something we can all do. But what the purpose behind it takes even things that are mundane, even things that are normal, even things that are just so basic. And once you realize the big purpose behind it, that conversation that you have with the person at school across the lunch table that is just, hey, how's it going? I just want you to know, if you ever want to talk, come talk to me. Boring little conversation, but it might change that person's life because of the big purpose behind it. I heard a guy talking about sandbags. Pretty boring. You think of the idea of shoveling sand into sandbags. A boring job, just kind of tie off the bag. But he was talking about some of the rescue efforts around, I believe at the time it was the Houston area. Filling sandbags is pretty boring unless you talk about the purpose of it being saving your town. Then you got a purpose. Then you're not just shoveling sand. You're saving a city. You're saving your friends and your neighbors. So when we think of sharing our faith, and I'm intentionally not using the word evangelism just to dodge that, but when we're sharing our faith, then those little conversations that we have with those little those little things at school where you see the person that nobody talks to and you go talk to them, or whatever. Those little things, when we remember our purpose behind all of it, is to introduce that soul to Jesus. It changes the perspective completely. It goes from shoveling sand into a bag to saving a town. And that's the focus that we as Christians need to really do our best to remind ourselves that's what we're doing. That our being friendly to the person that we see at the store, at the coffee shop, or whatever every morning, that's kind of a mundane, normal thing. But in the big picture, that's us building a relationship. That's us investing in a person that maybe someday, if we build that relationship enough, we can just ask them, hey, do you know anything about Jesus? What do you think about God? Because there's a purpose behind it that's bigger than just the conversation. Wes? Absolutely.
Like right here, collateral benefit. He's going to affect the lives of people wanting to give them money back.
Absolutely.
They may not even have been there. May not even.
Yeah.
Just like changes their lives, it affects around them, family.
Yeah. Yeah, what Wes is saying is there are extending benefits of Zacchaeus changing. Because what is he going to do? He's going to pay back the money that he defrauded. He's going to help the lives of some people who were probably some of the people in the crowd going, wow, Jesus is going to go eat with this sinner guy. Well, that sinner guy is going to pay you back 4 times what he owes you because he ripped you off, but he's changed. And that's so true. Our change, as the person we influence, is little change. We never know how much that's going to spiral. Yeah. 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 What April's saying is that what Zacchaeus sees is, this is all I've got. I've got to put out this effort to have this one chance at a contact. Any other thoughts? Uh-huh. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, what Linda's saying is that we can't shortchange the power of God's word. It's the Romans 1:16. It's God's power unto salvation to the Jew first and then to the Gentile. And we have to remember that it's not about what I say. Paul says in 1 Corinthians 2:2, I've chosen to know nothing but Christ and him crucified, because that's all that might be all I say. But it's God's word speaking. It's God speaking to that person. We can't sell that short. Yes, sir. Yeah, exactly. It is God's power, but what Paul says, it's up to us to release that. Somebody else? Yep. Yeah. Yeah, what John was saying is that whole idea of being authentic, I mean, that's exactly who Jesus was. There's people all over the world that look at religious people and go, I don't want anything to do with that because that person's not really who they say they are. So, I mean, and Jesus modeled that so perfectly. He's going to do whatever God said to do because that's really who he was. Okay, I got to stop. It's like tomorrow already.